Welcome to episode 30 of the Courageous Coach podcast, a podcast where we pull back the curtain on what it really takes to be courageous with your clients, your business, and your life. I'm your host, Melissa Haigh. And in this episode, I'm joined by Alison Roberts, and we're exploring the transformative power of curiosity in coaching and grounded confidence. If you've ever been told you need to be more curious, this episode is for you. Alison and I chat about how vulnerability is intertwined with curiosity, the importance of playfulness, and the necessity of unlearning ingrained habits that some of us bring from our previous corporate environments. We chat about the need to embrace discomfort and the role of curiosity in fostering innovation and creativity in both personal and professional realms. I think at the heart of this conversation is the encouragement for all of us to live authentically and pursue our passions without fear of regret. So, are you ready? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Courageous Coach podcast. Thank you so much for being here, whether you're listening or watching. I'm joined today by the wonderful Alison Roberts, who I have recently met and already enjoyed a very wonderful and intriguing conversation with. So I'm really excited today. Alison and I are going to have a conversation, and we've got this kind of loose topic around curiosity, but as always, we don't know where this is going to go. So we'll see, but I know it's going to be a good conversation. So thank you for being here, Alison. And let's start, as we always do, with just tell us a little bit about you, Alison.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So I am a qualified coach. I currently work in senior learning and development. I am freelance and I run my own company, Comms Lab, which is all around helping people to develop the human skills that AI cannot replace. So I want to take you back a little bit with my story, because I was lucky enough to have a father that he's a scientist. And he taught us to question. He encouraged it, actually. He encouraged a level of curiosity in all of us. And he wanted us to test things out, to look for patterns, to challenge even his thinking. So from a very young age, my brain was just full of questions and I never grew out of that. And at the age of 7, which was a bit of a turning point for me, I can remember I was in the playroom and my mum had organised a birthday party for me and I was waiting for all the other children to arrive. And I remember looking up at the skylights and I could see all the dust filtering through on the sun's rays. And as I was doing that, I became aware of a level of communication that was out of context for me, something that I hadn't previously noticed. And that prompted a series of questions that in some way I'm still pursuing. But the reason I want to highlight that experience is because it had a really defining quality on my career, and it really encouraged me to understand that there are multiple levels on which we communicate, and to investigate how I could immerse myself in more of those levels in order to connect better with people. And the second thing that I want to bring up is that for me, connection, communication, building rapport, all of those things have been in response to trauma early on in my life. And so when you kind of converge the two together, you can see how this journey has kind of brought me to where I am now.
Yeah. Amazing, isn't it? And what a I was going to say colourful story, right? It could feel your story, and what a gift that is, right? To be able to share a story and for someone that you are speaking to and sharing it with to feel connected to that story. And something you said, I think, is really interesting to me because this whole idea of curiosity, and you said, as a child, you were really encouraged to be curious and ask questions and
Yeah,
challenge, and, which are all things that as coaches we're like, well, that's kind of what we do, right?
yeah,
But you also said, and you never really grew out of it. And I think
yes,
that was such an interesting thing to say because one of the things I'm really conscious of is that I think certainly for me, there was a lot of natural curiosity in me as a child. I wouldn't have maybe didn't label it as curiosity, but really curious about the world. And I was one of those annoying children who asked why and why, but why, and drove my parents probably a little bit mad. But really natural curiosity to learn and experience and touch and feel the world around you. But I think I did grow out of it as I got older and became an adult. And I moved much more into that space of wanting to be a knower. And once I knew, I was done. Do you see what I mean? That sort of
I
almost
do.
like it was a destination to get to, something to achieve. And then, of course, I became a coach, and suddenly everyone was going, curiosity, very important as a coach. And you must be curious. And I'd almost forgotten how, right? Because I just unlearned it almost. And so,
Yes,
really, part of my journey as a coach has been to really reignite that childlike curiosity, right, around people and the world around me and all of those things. So, I mean, I know that's not your story, but do you recognize that in the people that you work with as well, Alison? Do you see that?
oh, 100%, Melissa. This is
Mm,
such a common thread that we're digging into here. And I was leading a course on women in leadership,
okay.
and one of the women's managers had said to her, "You need to be more curious."
Yeah.
And what frustrates me and other people about that is a meaningless thing. That is a meaningless instruction to give somebody. In the same way as you might say to a coach, you need to ask better questions. Well, what does that mean? Because better questions um, do not allow for you to tailor what you're asking to the individual. And so I think there is a say do gap there. I think the gap is we're asking people to be more of a certain thing, and many people like yourselves have forgotten how to do that.
Mm.
And they're suddenly standing there going, well, this sounds great. Where do I start?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you're saying that. Be more curious. Oh, I love that. Ask better questions. I'm like, oh, yeah. How do I do that? Okay. So this is interesting to me because curiosity is such an important part of coaching, but it's also a
Yeah.
really important part of being courageous because
Yeah.
one of the important things about courage is that we want to stay in the kind of be a learner, not a knower space, right? And that being a learner is where the curiosity comes in. But of course, to be curious, we have to be vulnerable because we're saying, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know where this might go, right? And
Mhm.
so there's a vulnerability to curiosity, I think, which also means as adults, we kind of avoid, right? Let's protect, armor up. I don't want to feel vulnerable, but it's actually our route to courage. So if we know that we want to be curious and we're being told to be curious, but we're maybe a little bit like me, it doesn't feel natural, or maybe we've unlearned it, we've forgotten how to be curious.
Yeah.
Where would you start? How would you encourage one of your clients or others to be curious? What would that actually mean for you?
So there's quite a lot to unpack there, Melissa. But what I want to do is just start with the vulnerability piece, because I think that we have a decision about how we choose to feel. And for me, I don't see vulnerability as a strength or a weakness. In fact, you can almost sideline vulnerability when you make a decision to be in service of your client, because then you understand that it's not about you, and that gives you courage. And it means that you bypass the slight resistance or the friction around vulnerability, because you're all about impact, contribution, and service. And so I've used that as a reframing tool with my clients, and that's worked really well.
Okay. And okay, so this again okay, curious. I'm interested. Right, hooked here. So this is such an important part of the work I do as well, because what I love that vulnerability isn't a strength or a weakness. And you also said something very important, which is I choose to feel.
Yeah.
Indicating, right, that we have a choice and some level of choice about the feelings, the things that come up for us.
Yeah.
And this is such an important part of emotional agility, right? This ability to go, okay, I feel vulnerable right now, or I feel sad, or I feel happy, or I feel stressed, or whatever it is. And I am curious about that emotion, right?
Yes.
And Susan David talks about this as being emotions aren't directives, they're data.
Yes.
And therefore, can we be curious about them?
Yes.
And that's been transformational, I think, for me in terms of, regulating and regulating emotions, emotional awareness, and using my emotions effectively in service and in the work that I do with clients. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about there. Is how does that land?
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that, Melissa. I think that if we focus too much on our inhibitions, and we are talking about courage here at the end of the day, my inhibitions have got no place for me personally in how I approach my coaching relationships. They are irrelevant. And so I think that there is a mindset piece around this. And I think that this is part of what it means to be a courageous coach and a courageous leader, that you acknowledge your emotions, whatever they are, and you validate them. We're all human. And you keep moving. And that is what curiosity can do. It can support us in moving through some of those slightly challenging, slightly uncomfortable emotions. And I think the other thing about curiosity is that when you begin to embed it more consciously in your life, and it is a decision, what happens is that those things become part of the curiosity process.
Okay. So now I'm curious about the choosing intentionally to embed curiosity in your, let's just say, life, right? Not necessarily just coaching, right, but in your life. So, okay, so what could, not should, but what could embedding curiosity look like?
A playfulness, I think, to begin with. I think it is being fascinated by others, the world around us, our environment, our inner workings. And so I start with things that fascinate me. New tech, AI. There is so much out there that is fascinating. So for me, it's more a question of trimming down what I find fascinating. But fascination and then playing with it, playing with what we see and understanding always that we know nothing. It is very, very easy, especially like I'm 62. I could turn around and say, I've had a 45-year career. There are things I know a lot about. But actually, all it takes is for me to have a conversation with someone whose values are different, whose perspective is different, and I realize I know nothing. So, playfulness, fascination, not being so attached to what you think you know that you inhibit new insights, new patterns, new information, and new growth happening.
Mm. I mean, when you started to talk about the things that you're fascinated by, right? I mean, what I noticed, watching you as you were speaking is your energy shifted immediately, right? Oh, I'm fascinated. And it is almost like a childlike, that beautiful childlike, oh my goodness, what could this be? What might this be? And so I love that idea of, what am I fascinated by? And, what creates that energy for me as well.
Yeah.
And I always say to people, actually, I say to people when I'm working with new coaches, doing new, doing their first coaching qualification. And we talk about, obviously, we talk a lot about listening as a skill, right?
Yeah.
And this whole thing of, someone's speaking and what you're actually doing is you're preparing your next answer, rather than actually listening. And the new coaches always say to me, well, yeah, but how do you stop that? How can I stop that kind of thing that I've been doing for years as an adult, right? And I always say, my only answer really, and like you say, I don't know this. It's not, this is just how I keep myself present and listening, is that I am endlessly curious about what this person is going to say next.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what they're going to say next. I might think I do for many different reasons, but I don't know what they're going to say next. So I am endlessly fascinated. Like, what's this person going to say next? Rather than, what do I need to say next?
Yes.
And that's it's just a very slight shift, So I love that idea of fascination, because I think that's what it is for me, curiosity. Yeah.
So I think that it's interesting because we've doubled back on the part of the conversation where we spoke about vulnerability. And I made the point, it's not about us. Once you take the spotlight off you and put it where it belongs, then these things become a lot more easier, a lot more natural, and they flow as part of the conversation. And everything then becomes a lot more human, a lot more real, a lot more in the moment. That is something that I think takes a little bit more courage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think that there's something interesting here as well, because, again, I think that when we do our kind of early kind of coach training, I say whether it's the first qualification or the first course that people do when they learn about coaching, that we are, and I say we because I know this is what I learned, and I know, other people have reported this as well, is that, often what we learn, it might not be specifically what we're taught, but what we learn is, it's not about us, it's about them, it's about the client, right? And interestingly, what I see is that many new coaches translate that into, I must keep myself distant and removed, disconnected, we might say, because it's not about me, it's about them, right? And I think that's a misunderstanding of the nuance of what it's not about you, it's about them means. And I think that's what you're talking about here, right? Because we want connection and we want humanity, because we're not AI bots.
No.
So we want some of us in the connection, in the relationship. But I think when you said mindset, I thought, it's this mindset piece of not about, it's not me, it's them, right?
I think it's that service mentality. And I think, certainly from my experience of talking to my network and my own goals around coaching, is all about how we can empower people and how we can help them live a more happier, more satisfying life. So this is not about, this is finding a point where we can join and where I am prepared to step into the conversation as my authentic self, but where I am curious in that I am monitoring my responses to ensure that they don't disconnect me from the relationship and the discussion. I think that's where we're at with this, and that does take some self-awareness.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I mean, this whole piece around, this whole series or this season in the podcast, we're talking about grounded confidence, and curiosity is part of that grounded confidence.
Yeah.
But that's alongside, self-awareness, mindfulness, emotional agility. There's kind of component parts to it. And you're right. I think being aware of self, doing your own work on self, knowing, what gets in your way, how things might happen for you, how to regulate and notice what might be helpful here, because it's about the connection between me and my client, and what's my stuff, what stuff that I need to deal with in supervision or reflection or whatever. All of that is part of what we're talking about here, I think.
Yeah.
Alison, I want to come back to playfulness, because you sparked something there for me. Because funnily enough, I worked with a wonderful, wonderful coach last year called Ashley Crocker. And I'm a huge, firm believer in coaches need coaches to be coached, right?
Yes.
And a wonderful coach. And he works outdoors, which is where I feel often most alive, most present, and most curious, is when I'm out in kind of nature. Anyway, that wasn't where I was going. But one of the things we worked on was playfulness, because again, as an adult, I'd kind of forgotten how to play. And a lot of my play as an adult, as I uncovered, is what I call structured play, which is still play and still valuable. But this kind of free play was like, no, I don't. I want rules and structure and guidelines and handrails, and I don't want a free play, right? And so I've been experimenting since working with Ashley to really enhance my kind of free play, because this idea of playfulness, I really see this connection between curiosity and playfulness. I can no longer disconnect them in my mind.
Yeah.
And so playfulness, is so key to curiosity and therefore to courageous coaching. But again, it's another thing that many of us have stopped, or that's for children, it's not for adults. I'm a grown-up now, that kind of thing. So it's so interesting that you mentioned playfulness, because I'm beginning to love that word almost as much as I love curiosity. I did not love it a year ago. So, there's work here for me,
I think on the playfulness part, I wouldn't say that I apply play in all areas of my life. But curiosity is one area where I definitely do, because of where it's led me. It's led me to new experiences, new ways of thinking and doing and behaving. It's led me down paths that I would never have dreamt of going. And that is what has brought me, the career that I've had, which has been a very squiggly career. But I couldn't, when I was younger, do the career that I really wanted. I wanted to be a school teacher. But I couldn't pass my maths O level because I've got dyslexia. So I've ended up in adult education, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that to say that at that point, there was a bit of a void. I didn't know where my career was going to lead me. So I played with options. Then I played with the one that fascinated me the most. And I jumped into that. And I used that as leverage to play with another concept. And so I have jumped from industry to industry, environment to environment, because of a playful approach to curiosity and a willingness to listen to my heart and to my head in equal measure
Mm.
and make the leaps into the areas that are the most fascinating to me.
Mm. And of course, taking the leaps into those areas that are, of most fascination to you is what strikes me there, of course, because I think what's implied is that in doing that, you're taking the leap into areas that where you don't know.
Yeah, correct. I know
Right.
nothing.
And that, yeah, it's like, okay, I know nothing here, right? I'm not the expert. I don't know everything that I need to know. That's a courageous leap then.
Yeah,
And okay, so this is then bringing me on to the thing around, we've talked about working with clients and being in service of clients, but of course many coaches, who are independent coaches, they're setting up their own practice, their own business, maybe becoming independent for the first time. So actually everything that we're talking about, or everything you've just shared there around curiosity, is true as well when it comes to your business, the kind of life that you're creating for yourself when you become a coach, or when you decide to start a coaching business.
yeah, 100%. I
Mm.
mean, I I would never be so disrespectful to myself or to anyone else to insert myself into environments where I clearly have no ability, no background, and no experience. But to come back to the beginning of the conversation, because for me, human skills, connection, rapport, trust, listening, all of these things have been so core to my life and been like the golden thread that's run through everything. Actually, you can apply those in many different environments.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been sales, marketing, consultancy, and then, as I said, coaching, L&D. All of those are people professions. And
Mm.
so it's been a fascinating experiment to me that in each of those different environments, I've been able to draw on a different level of skills, new perspective, fresh ways of thinking. And I have grown so much as a result of that. One of the
Mm.
other things that I want to raise before we go on to the next subject is that curiosity can be quite uncomfortable for people.
Yeah.
And as coaches, as people who are keen to grow and develop so that we can be our best selves for the people around us and our clients,
Mm.
I think it's incredibly important for us to practice sitting with discomfort because, as you've rightly said, when you start your own business, the safety nets are gone. You are the safety net, and that can feel quite uncomfortable and unfamiliar territory for people. So, what I advise my clients to do is to move into these new scenarios, new approaches gently and mindfully, and
Mm.
be the observer and recorder of your experience. Gather data, understand where you're naturally good and where you're struggling, and either get help or double down on the areas where you're struggling. But understand that this is a process and that you won't nail it. I've run 6 successful businesses throughout my 45-year career. I still feel like a business novice because now I'm starting a business, but the ecosystem is so different.
Different. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay. So right. So where my mind went to there as well is this, thinking about this idea of kind of sitting with discomfort.
Yes.
Is that we're talking about this in terms of coaching, in our work with our clients, and potentially, if you're running your own business as well around that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I guess strikes me is that, well, this is my experience, so I don't know whether this is true for anyone else, but certainly in my sense, something I've become really aware of only really relatively recently, is that if I want to be courageous in my coaching work, if I want to exercise curiosity, I want to be able to hold space and be present and, do all of those things that we aspire to do to the best of our ability as coaches.
Yeah.
I can't do those things in isolation, just in that coaching bubble. I actually need to live my life in that way, if that
Yes.
makes sense. So I also need to be curious and sit with discomfort and all of those things, in all aspects of my life. And
Yeah.
and I think that was like a bit of a realization for me of, that's what being human, being a whole human being in your work means. It's not about work life separate, right? So I've been finding ways to get really uncomfortable, in my life, or to sit with discomfort. Sometimes I have to force the uncomfortability, like I do something brand new for the first time. Last week, I went to a line dancing class for the first time in my life. I was like, this is going to be a nightmare. I'm not going with a friend. I don't know anyone there. I've never done this before.
Good for you.
Wouldn't describe myself as a dancer. I was like, do you know what? I'm going to do it. And I got to count, move, dance, and sing along to some great music. What a fabulous evening it was. But that was an example of, I need to make myself a little bit uncomfortable sometimes outside of just in the coaching space.
Yeah.
So this idea of sitting with discomfort, I just really like this idea of, it's not just about doing that with your client. You need to experiment. I love you use the word experiment. You need to experiment with that in lots of different, unique ways.
Yes.
To really strengthen those muscles,
Yeah, 100%. I think some of the conversations I've been having recently are about how we reduce rigidity, which comes from habits and comes from other people's expectations, the environment's expectations around us.
Yeah.
And I think once we become more and more aware of it, as you have, you can then start to say, well, this bit is too uncomfortable for me now. It's too big of a leap.
Mm-hmm.
Because kindness is really important. So whilst I am unafraid to challenge myself and challenge others in a positive way, you have to be kind as well. And so it's about moving yourself along a timeline on the understanding that that's what you're doing. You are looking to remove rigidity and increase curiosity, and therefore broaden your experience and your ability to play in all areas of your life.
Yeah.
And that comes back to what we said at the beginning. It's a mindset, it's a decision, it's an inner drive.
Yeah.
It is an intention.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's because another episode that we've got coming up in the season is around, we're going to be talking about mastery, but actually we're going to talk about mastery and discipline. And discipline's quite a difficult word, I think, for some people. But for me, discipline is that intention. I'm going to keep doing this and I'm going to keep trying. And maybe I'm going to push myself to that edge where I say, okay, this is about where I'm, as far as I want to go right now. But really but there's a discipline required in order to do that, because your brain will kick in pretty quickly to go, not safe, stop doing this, because it thinks that, something dramatically terrible is going to happen when actually it really isn't, right? So really I love this idea of rigidity versus agility, right? So
Yes.
when I talk about emotional agility, the opposite of that, of course, is emotional rigidity. And I think that something I've sort of become aware of, learned recently, is that we search for rigidity in times of uncertainty, right?
Yes.
When we're uncertain, we want certainty. And one of the ways we get certain is we say, right, well, I'm going to get rigid. This is the truth. This is the way. This is what I know. And actually, everything is uncertain right now. I feel like, and I say right now, I just feel that's life now, right? Life is just uncertain. It probably always has been, but the world around us is uncertain as well.
Yes.
And so I'm really aware that in that uncertainty, my brain is going to do its very best to find certainty for me, because certainty is safe. But I need to be able to sit in that uncertainty. And like you say, that, avoid or stay away from, be mindful of that rigidity whilst being kind. I'm just going to repeat your point, which is a really important point, whilst being kind and compassionate to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think trying to find safety in a world that we cannot control and that ultimately is never truly safe in the true meaning of the word, will not lead to peace and will not lead to happiness, and is the death of curiosity. I think what I have found is that rather than discipline, which is a word that I really struggle with, I prefer habit. And I have found that the more I play with big and little questions, different questions, new questions, the more it becomes a habit, the more confident and the more the more confident I am, because doing things differently is a habit. And so the more you apply curiosity, the more surprised you are, the more you realize you don't know, the more there is to know, the more excitement for me personally that generates.
Yeah.
And the more comfortable I am with the unknown, with discomfort, and with areas, or moving into new areas, forging new paths. So I think habit is the precursor for confidence in all areas, actually, not just in this area.
Yeah. And it's kind of practice, commitment to, all of those. Yeah, absolutely. Rather than just say that word discipline, just makes me feel like I'm at school and I get a really visceral reaction to the word, right? But it's a commitment to practice and to create habit, and in setting intentions, keeping going, all of those things. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing that's just sort of niggling around in my brain, tapping away at me, is around this idea of curiosity, because I know this is part of my story, really. But I know that often, I came out of employed life into, setting up my own coaching practice. I have lots of different bits of my business, but, the idea was to coach as much as possible. And what I realized quite quickly as a big part of my story, and I think others that experience this as well, is that where I'd come from corporate life, where, everything, I was rewarded for having the answer. I was rewarded for being the expert in the room. I was promoted, I was remunerated, I was praised, recognized, for being the expert, for having the answer, for being the knower.
Yes.
And I was really, when I became aware that I wanted to step away from being a knower and being into being a learner and being curious, I was kind of like, I didn't realize how much that had become I'm going to say habit, ingrained, right? Because of my my experience in employment.
Yeah.
And so that's where the unlearning began.
Yeah.
And I think that still catches me out sometimes. I might be, with a client or whatever, and I find myself needing to know, and I think, I don't need to know. Just, lighten up, and let's think about the curiosity. What would curiosity look like here? So I sometimes think what was niggling around in my head is that maybe there's something about the system around us that exists around us also doesn't always encourage us to be curious.
Yes.
And so it is a question, but I'm not sure it's a question for you to answer, Alison, because it sort of feels like it might be a bit of a big question, because it's kind of like, okay, so the system around us is encouraging us to be a knower and doesn't really reward curiosity. But we want to break free of that, right? We want to know, I want to break free of that. And we've now got to unlearn all of those stories and all of that conditioning that we've had for, in my case, 25 years or whatever. And I kind of feel like that can be hard. That's a hard, it's not doable. It absolutely is doable, but it's hard. And that sort of brings me back to your point around habit, intention, being kind to yourself. Yeah, there's something in that unlearning that's tough, right? It's tough.
So look, you are not the only person that's talked to me about this, and I'm sure this is going to resonate so strongly with so many of your listeners who are making the transition out of the guardrails provided by corporate into a whole new area. What you've talked about is quite a deep and nuanced question, actually, or series of remarks, because when I talk to organizations about embedding curiosity, one of the first things is, does your culture support it? Or are you working on your culture or your values in such a way that it can support it in the future? Because if you're not, there's going to be a disconnect there because of exactly what you've said. You're used to things being a certain way, and when you're suddenly, and by the way, there's an enormous amount of stats coming through now around curiosity in the workplace. And for example, in the last 2 years on LinkedIn, there's been 158% increase in people talking about curiosity, posting about it, 90% increase on job postings requiring curiosity in the last 3 years. This is not an engine that is going to start slowing down anytime soon. And there are obviously rewards to the bottom line. No company is going to promote a new behavior or way of being if it wasn't to their advantage. Because in times of change, as you've mentioned, we need curiosity to innovate, to double down on that flexibility, to see and notice patterns and connections that we haven't before, to be more creative. All of these different things are supported by curiosity. So on one hand, we can see that there is this thing looming, which is becoming more and more part of our lives.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, we're seeing, as you've rightly identified, that our ecosystem, both in and outside of work, is not geared up to support and reward curious thinkers. So I just want to highlight something very quickly. So I am a massive advocate of something called SQ, spiritual intelligence. So it's this is not anything from me. It's a lady called Dana Zohar, but I run workshops on it. And one of the dimensions of spiritual intelligence, there are 12 in all, is, and I'm paraphrasing, beat to the sound of your own drum. And another one is curiosity. Okay, so to me, we have a decision to make here. am I going to model curiosity and all the other things that I know are so important for me to survive and thrive in environments of intense change and uncertainty? And am I going to beat to the sound of my own drum? Or am I going to play a smaller part in this? And so the question I always ask myself, which helps prompt me to the edge of discomfort and then leap, is, will I regret this if I don't do it? And I do not want to leave to finish up my life with regrets. That is the one thing. Everything else I can deal with. I'll make mistakes. I screw up. I'm human. All of these things. I'm exploring like everyone else is. But that's the one thing that I could not bear, because it would feel like a waste of a life to me. I think that we can find creative ways to talk to ourselves in such a way that we give ourselves the strength and the courage to be the person that we know we need to in order to be able to thrive in the environment we're in today.
Yeah. Oh, that is really powerful, Alison, right? This whole thing about regret and not wanting to live a life of regret. And you reminded me of this idea. I think what's important for me, the question, I think, which is along the similar sort of lines that I'm beginning to build into my process, my internal process, is, if I do this, does it move me closer to the life I want to live?
Yes.
And it's, it sounds like a big question, but actually it's a very simple question. I'm very clear on the life I want to live. So this piece of work or this client or this social thing, does it move me closer to the life I want to live? Yes or no? Yes, no, or maybe. Sometimes it's a maybe, and it might need to be experimented with.
Yes.
But, if it's a no, then I choose not to do it. So this is such how we talk to ourselves, that our internal process, and is so important. Alison, I feel like that's just a really beautiful place for us to close. But what I want to close with is just kind of what I hope is a simple question. But I'm curious about what would be the one thing that you would want to share with our audience, who are going to, primarily be coaches, around being more curious?
Ask the questions that you know you need to, but that may be a little bit uncomfortable. Ask them.
Take a deep breath and ask. Yeah, lovely.
And follow your instincts with those, and in your own life as well. Be a bit more adventurous. If you're being pulled towards something, give it a go.
Yeah, and live to the beat of your own drum, right? Yeah, love it. Alison, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been wonderful chatting with you and thinking with you and being curious with you. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for being here.
Likewise.
And take good care. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Courageous Coach podcast. I hope it gave you something to reflect on, something to feel, and maybe even something to act on. If you've been nodding along or feeling that tug of recognition, you're not alone. These conversations are here to remind us that courage isn't about having it all figured out. It's about showing up, doing the inner work, and being willing to be seen, even when it feels uncomfortable. If developing your own courage, compassion, and grounded confidence is work you want to go deeper with, you're warmly invited to join me inside the Courageous Coach program, opening again in 2026, with one cohort starting in March and the second in September. It's where we take everything we talk about here and turn it into practice, community, and real change. You can find all the details on my website, and I've shared the link in the show notes. to make it easier for you. And if we're not already connected, come and find me on LinkedIn. Whether you've got questions about the programme, want to share what's resonated for you in this episode, or you just fancy a chat. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you know another coach who might need a little courage boost, pass it on. Courage is contagious after all. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, stay curious, stay human, and keep choosing courage.